My neighbor's daughter came to my door and said I need a husband by Friday. The knock was frantic, desperate. Peter Papafava opened his door to find Mila Ribeiro, the sweet girl from next door he'd watched grow up, standing trembling on his porch. Rain plastered her dark hair to her cheeks, but the wetness on her face wasn't just the storm. "Peter," she gasped, her voice cracking, her eyes wide with a terror he'd never seen before. "Please, I know this sounds crazy, but you have to help me." She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "I need a husband by Friday, or I lose everything." Peter Papafava wasn't a man accustomed to sudden, dramatic disruptions. At 42, he lived a quiet, structured life in the sleepy suburbs of Seattle. A freelance architect, he spent his days drafting blueprints, tending his meticulously manicured bonsai collection, and occasionally sharing a beer over the fence with his neighbor, Rodney Pirano. Rodney was a loud, boisterous widower, and Mila was his only daughter. Peter had known Mila since she was 10, a scrawny kid with scraped knees and a penchant for climbing his cherry tree. Now at 24, Mila was a successful graphic designer, vibrant and independent. Or she had been until this very moment. Petter pulled her inside out of the driving rain. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from the couch and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. "Mila, slow down. You're freezing. What's going on? Where's your dad?" Mila collapsed onto the edge of the sofa, burying her face in her hands. A ragged sob tore from her throat. "He's gone, Petter. Dad passed away." The words hit Peter like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. Rodney? Gone? He'd just seen him Tuesday complaining about the crabgrass. "When? How?" "Mila, I am so incredibly sorry." She wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara into dark, tragic circles. "A massive heart attack late last night. It was fast, but that's not why I'm here. Not really." Petter sat beside her, confused. "What do you mean? You said something about needing a husband?" Mila looked up, her expression a mix of profound grief and sheer panic. "It's his will, Peter. Dad's will. The lawyers called me in this morning. I thought it was just standard procedure, reading the estate details, but Dad left a stipulation." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He left the house, the business, everything to me. But there's a condition. The estate is held in a trust managed by his horrible brother, Uncle Sylvian Holland. Remember him?" Peter nodded grimly. Sylvian was a notorious real estate developer, ruthless and cold. Rodney had despised him. "Yes, I remember him. What's the condition, Mila?" "Dad was old-fashioned, Peter. You know that. He always worried about me being alone, being taken advantage of. The will states that I only inherit if I am legally married by my 25th birthday. Otherwise, the entire estate defaults to Sylvian. And he's already planning to bulldoze the house and build condos." "Your 25th birthday," Petter calculated quickly. "That's Friday," Mila whispered. "This Friday. 4 days away." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The absurdity of the situation warred with the stark reality of Mila's desperation. "And Sylvian?" Petter asked softly. "He was there at the reading," Mila said, her voice turning bitter. "He practically gloated. He knows I'm single. He thinks it's a done deal. He's already given me a notice to vacate by Monday." Peter stood up, pacing the length of his living room. His mind raced. This was insane. It was antiquated. It was precisely the kind of misguided, overprotective meddling Rodney was known for. "Mila, this can't be legal. You need to contest it. Hire a lawyer." "I asked the estate lawyer," she cried. "He said contesting it could take years, and during that time Sylvian controls the trust. He'd drain it dry, fighting me. The only way to stop him to save the house is to fulfill the condition. I have to get married." She looked at him, her dark eyes pleading. "Peter, I don't know anyone else I can trust. I know it's asking the impossible, but please, marry me, just on paper, just until I secure the inheritance. Then we can annul it, divorce, whatever. I'll compensate you, whatever you want. Just save me." The proposition hung in the air, a crazy, impossible idea that refused to dissipate. Peter stared at Mila, seeing not the desperate woman before him, but the 10-year-old girl who had proudly presented him with a mud pie, declaring it his birthday cake. He owed Rodney. Rodney had been a friend when Peter had needed one most, pulling him out of a dark depression after his own messy divorce years ago. "Mila," Peter began, his voice rough, "this is madness. Marriage is a legal contract. It has implications, taxes, liabilities." "I've thought of all that," Mila interrupted, reaching into her damp tote bag and pulling out a thick, legal-looking document. "I had a lawyer draft a prenuptial agreement this afternoon, a post-nup, whatever we need. It clearly states this is a marriage of convenience solely for the purpose of fulfilling the trust conditions. Neither of us has any claim to the other's assets. It's ironclad." She pushed the papers across the coffee table. "Please, Peter, read it. Have your own lawyer read it. But I need an answer soon. We have to get a license, arrange a quick ceremony." Petter looked at the papers, then back at Mila. She looked so fragile, yet underneath the grief and panic there was a core of steel. She was fighting for her home, for her father's legacy. How could he refuse? "Okay," Petter said finally, the word feeling heavy on his tongue. "Okay, Mila, I'll read it. I'll call my lawyer first thing tomorrow, but if he says it's safe, I'll do it." Relief washed over Mila's face, so profound it almost looked like pain. She lunged forward, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, Peter. You don't know what this means." He awkwardly patted her back, the scent of rain and damp wool filling his senses. He was stepping into a minefield. He knew it. But the alternative, watching Mila lose everything to the likes of Sylvie and Holland, was unacceptable. The next few days were a blur of frenetic activity. Peter's lawyer, a pragmatic woman named Anto Tapia, reviewed the prenup with a critical eye. "It's tight," Anto admitted, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Unconventional, certainly, and a bit risky. If she defaults or if her uncle challenges the validity of the marriage, it could get messy. But legally, if you follow these terms, you are protected from her debts and she from yours." "So I should do it?" Petter asked, seeking validation. Anto sighed. "Legally, yes, you're covered. Personally, it's a huge commitment, Peter. Even a fake marriage requires effort. You'll have to convince people it's real, at least long enough for the inheritance to settle. Are you prepared for that?" Petter thought of Mila's tear-stained face. "I am." They secured the marriage license on Wednesday. The clerk at the courthouse barely glanced at them, stamping the forms with bureaucratic indifference. Mila was pale, her hand trembling as she signed her name. Petter squeezed her hand reassuringly, feeling a strange surge of protectiveness. The ceremony was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at City Hall. It was a bleak, functional affair. Mila wore a simple white dress she'd bought off the rack, and Petter wore his best suit. Anto served as a witness, along with Mila's best friend, Yasmina Ekberg, who looked alternatively supportive and horrified. As the judge rushed through the vows, Petter looked at Mila. Her eyes were fixed on the judge, her jaw clenched. She wasn't a blushing bride. She was a soldier going into battle. "Do you, Petter Papafava, take Mila Ribeiro?" The words felt surreal. He repeated them mechanically, slipping a plain gold band, purchased hastily that morning, onto her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The judge's gavel hit the block. It was done. They were married. The reception was a quiet dinner at a local Italian restaurant, a strained attempt at normalcy. Yasmina tried to keep the conversation light, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mila was quiet, picking at her pasta, her eyes continually darting to her phone. "She's worried about Sylvian," Yasmina whispered to Petter when Mila went to the restroom. "He's been calling her non-stop, threatening her." Petter frowned. "She hasn't told me." "She didn't want to worry you," Yasmina said. "But Petter, Sylvian is dangerous. He plays dirty. He won't just let this go." When Mila returned, she looked even paler. "It's Sylvian," she said, her voice shaking. "He knows. He found out about the license." "How?" Petter asked, alarmed. "He has connections everywhere. He just texted me. He said a piece of paper won't stop him. He's demanding a meeting tomorrow morning at the house. Friday morning, the day of Mila's 25th birthday. The deadline." They arrived at Mila's house early. The for sale sign Sylvian had presumptuously erected on the lawn had been unceremoniously yanked out and tossed in the bushes. The house, usually warm and inviting, felt cold and empty without Rodney's booming laugh. Promptly at 9, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Sylvie and Holland emerged, flanked by a burly man who looked less like an assistant and more like a bodyguard. Sylvian was a sharp contrast to his late brother, thin, impeccably dressed, with eyes that held no warmth. He stepped onto the porch without knocking, letting himself in. "Mila, darling," he sneered, his gaze sweeping over Petter with disdain. "And the good neighbour. How quaint." Mila stood her ground, clutching a folder containing the marriage certificate and the trust documents. "You have no right to be here, Sylvian. I've met the condition. I am married." Sylvian laughed, a dry, mirthless sound. "Married? To this? Please, Mila, don't insult my intelligence. It's a transparent sham, a marriage of convenience to steal my brother's legacy." "It's a legal marriage," Petter interjected, stepping slightly in front of Mila. "And the legacy belongs to Mila. Rodney wanted her to have it." "Rodney was a fool," Sylvian snapped. "He didn't understand business. This property is prime real estate. It's wasted on a sentimental girl." He turned to his bodyguard. "Ronald, the papers." Ronald Carlson handed Sylvian a thick envelope. Sylvian tossed it onto the coffee table. "I'm not playing games, Mila. I've already filed an injunction to halt the transfer of the estate. I am challenging the validity of your marriage." Mila gasped. "You can't do that." "I already have," Sylvian said smoothly. "I have private investigators looking into this sudden romance. And let me tell you, it doesn't take much to prove a marriage is fraudulent. Unless, of course, you can prove you actually live together, share expenses, act like a real married couple." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'll drag this through the courts until you're bankrupt, Mila. Unless you walk away now. Take a small settlement, and I get the house." "No," Mila said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I won't let you destroy Dad's home." Sylvian smirked. "Suit yourself, but understand this, little girl. I will tear your life apart to prove this marriage is a fake. You've made a very powerful enemy today." He turned and strode out, Ronald following closely behind. The silence they left behind was deafening. Peter looked at Mila. She was shaking uncontrollably. The quick fix they thought they had found had just become a war, and Petter realized with a sinking feeling that he was right in the middle of the crossfire. The marriage on paper was no longer enough. If they were going to beat Sylvian, they had to prove their marriage was real. To everyone. The weekend arrived not with the celebratory joy of a 25th birthday, but with the grim, exhausting reality of an impending siege. If Sylvian Holland wanted proof of a cohabitating, genuinely married couple, they were going to have to give it to him. Fast. The logistical nightmare began on Saturday morning. It made the most sense for Mila to move into Peter's house. Her childhood home was too saturated with the fresh, agonizing memories of Rodney and Peter's house. A modernist structure of glass and reclaimed wood he had designed himself, offered better security and vantage points. "Box of kitchen stuff," Yasmina announced, dropping a heavy cardboard cube onto Peter's pristine, white oak living room floor. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, eyeing Peter's minimalist decor with a mix of awe and skepticism. "You know, for a fake marriage, this involves a tragic amount of heavy lifting. Are we sure we can't just Photoshop her into your living room?" Petter offered a weary half smile, adjusting his grip on a crate of Mila's graphic design art books. "Sylvian's private investigators won't be fooled by pixels, Yasmina. They need to see her car in my driveway, her mail in my box, and her shadow in my windows." Mila walked in through the connecting side door between their properties, carrying an armful of clothes still on their hangers. She looked utterly drained, the vibrant energy that usually defined her replaced by a hollow, haunted exhaustion. She dumped the clothes onto Peter's sleek leather sofa. "That's the last of the clothes I'll need for now," she said, her voice quiet. She looked around the spacious, meticulously organized room, suddenly seeming very small. "Peter, I'm ruining your sanctuary. I know how much you value your peace." Petter set the books down and walked over to her. He fought the urge to wrap his arms around her, a residual paternal instinct he was finding increasingly difficult to navigate now that she wore his ring. "Mila, stop. This house is just wood and glass. It means nothing compared to keeping you safe and securing Rodney's legacy. My guest room is yours." "Actually," Yasmina interrupted, leaning against the kitchen island, "about that. If Sylvian has goons watching the house, they might be using thermal imaging or peeking through the gaps in the blinds. If they see you sleeping in separate bedrooms, the gig is up before it even starts." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Peter's breath hitched. He looked at Mila, whose pale cheeks were suddenly dusted with a frantic, flushed pink. "She's right," Mila whispered, refusing to meet Peter's eyes. "Sylvian told us he's looking for any excuse. We can't give him one. I have to stay in your room." Peter rubbed the back of his neck, feeling a sudden spike of heat. He was 42. She was 24. He had watched her learn to ride a bicycle. The idea of sharing his private sanctuary, his bed, with her felt like crossing a boundary he wasn't sure he could return from. But survival demanded sacrifice. "Okay," Peter agreed, his voice rougher than he intended. "My bed is a king size. We have plenty of space. I'll take the left side, you take the right. We treat it like a trench in a war zone, strictly business." To prove Yasmina's paranoia right, the reality of their surveillance became apparent less than an hour later. Peter was on the front porch, breaking down cardboard boxes when he noticed the car. It was an unassuming grey sedan parked halfway down the street, its engine idling. The windows were heavily tinted. Just then, Olegario Bergstrom, the neighbourhood busybody who practically lived with binoculars glued to his face, ambled down the sidewalk walking his pug. Olegario stopped at the edge of Peter's lawn, his eyes darting between Peter and the boxes. "Moving day, Peter," Olegario called out, his voice practically vibrating with suppressed curiosity. "Saw Mila carrying things over. Rodney barely in the ground and she's moving in. Seems a bit sudden, wouldn't you say?" Peter's jaw clenched. Olegario was exactly the kind of loose-lipped neighbour Sylvian's investigators would pump for information. It was time for the first performance. "Life is short, Olegario," Peter said smoothly, stepping off the porch. He forced a relaxed, glowing smile onto his face as Mila emerged from the front door to check on him. Without missing a beat, Peter reached out, wrapping his arm securely around Mila's waist and pulling her flush against his side. Mila stiffened for a fraction of a second before melting into the embrace, resting her head against his shoulder. "We realized we didn't want to waste another second," Peter lied flawlessly, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to the crown of her hair. He felt her tremble slightly against him. "Rodney's passing taught us that tomorrow isn't promised, so we made it official." Olegario's eyes bugged out, flicking down to the gold band on Mila's left hand. "Married? Well, I'll be. I had no idea you two were, well, congratulations, I suppose." As Olegario waddled away in a state of shock, Peter kept his arm around Mila. He glanced down the street. The grey sedan slowly pulled away from the curb, turning the corner and vanishing from sight. The performance had worked, but as Peter released Mila, he realized his heart was hammering against his ribs, and the phantom warmth of her body lingered long after she stepped away. By Tuesday, the physical exhaustion of moving had been entirely replaced by a creeping, psychological paranoia. Peter and Mila were no longer just neighbours. They were co-stars in a high-stakes 24/7 reality show where the audience wanted to destroy them. The morning was dedicated to financial intertwining, a necessary evil to create the paper trail Sylvian demanded. They sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of the local bank branch, signing document after document to open a joint checking account. Mila transferred a portion of her graphic design earnings, and Peter added funds from his architectural firm. "There," the bank manager smiled, handing them a pair of shiny new debit cards. "You're all set, Mr. and Mrs. Papafava." Mila flinched at the name, a micro-expression that Peter caught but the manager missed. Outside the bank, the Seattle sky was a relentless, dreary grey, mirroring their mood. "We need to be seen in public," Peter said, adjusting the collar of his coat against the damp wind. "Doing normal, married couple things, groceries, coffee. If they check our bank statements, they need to see joint expenses at local spots." They walked toward a bustling artisan cafe a few blocks away. Peter made a conscious effort to hold her hand. Mila's fingers were icy, her grip tight and nervous. As they walked, Peter acutely felt the stares of passers-by, real or imagined. Inside the cafe, the warm scent of roasted espresso and cinnamon offered a brief respite. They ordered lattes and sat at a small, intimate table near the window. Peter positioned his chair so he could monitor the street. "How are you holding up?" Peter asked softly, tracing the rim of his ceramic cup. Mila looked up, dark circles shadowing her eyes. "I feel like I'm losing my mind, Peter. I keep waiting for Dad to walk through the door and tell me this is all a bad dream. And every time a car drives past slowly, my chest tightens. We will get through this." Petter reassured her, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "We just have to play the game better than Sylvian." "Excuse me, mind if I borrow this chair?" The voice was bright, sharp and sudden. A woman stood next to their table, gesturing to the empty seat beside Petter. She was striking. Tall, with a sharp blonde bob, piercing blue eyes and wearing a tailored trench coat that looked far too expensive for a casual Tuesday morning coffee run. "Go ahead," Peter said politely, but his instincts flared. There were other empty tables. The woman didn't just take the chair, she lingered. She looked from Peter to Mila, a calculating smile playing on her lips. "I couldn't help but notice," she said, her tone dripping with manufactured sweetness. "You two look so incredibly in love. Newlyweds?" Mila swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, just recently." "How wonderful," the woman said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Julie Halverson. I write a lifestyle blog about Seattle's hidden romantic gems. I love featuring local couples. How long have you two been together? It must have been a whirlwind romance, considering I haven't seen you around this neighborhood before." Petter felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The questions were too specific, too probing. She wasn't a blogger. "We've known each other for years," Petter said smoothly, leaning back and projecting an aura of calm dominance. "I've lived next door to Mila's family for a long time. The romance was a long time coming." Julie's smile didn't reach her icy eyes. "Fascinating. A classic girl next door story. Though usually people invite their friends to the wedding. I heard through the grapevine it was quite the secretive affair." Mila's breath hitched. She looked at Petter, panic flashing in her eyes. Julie was one of Sylvian's people. She had to be. Peter knew they had to shut this down, decisively and publicly. He didn't think, he simply acted. "We prefer our privacy," Petter said, his voice dropping an octave, turning intimate and husky. He reached over, cupping the side of Mila's face. He felt her gasp against his palm, but he didn't stop. He leaned across the small cafe table and pressed his lips firmly against hers. It was meant to be a show, a purely theatrical move. But the moment their lips met, the world outside the cafe seemed to vanish. Mila tasted like vanilla and anxiety, but after a second of shock, she melted into him. Her hand came up to grip his lapel, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss with a desperate, surprising hunger. Petter's heart slammed against his ribs, a surge of adrenaline and unexpected fire rushing through his veins. For 3 agonizingly long, intoxicating seconds, the fake marriage felt terrifyingly real. When Peter finally pulled away, his breathing was slightly uneven. Mila's cheeks were flushed crimson, her eyes wide and dazed. He looked back at Julie Halverson, whose smug smile had faltered slightly. "As I said," Petter murmured, keeping his gaze locked on the blogger. "We prefer our privacy. Have a good day, Julie." Julie stood up quickly, abandoning the chair. "Right, congratulations again." She practically fled the cafe. Petter sat back down, staring at Mila. Neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled with a new, dangerous electricity. They'd convinced the investigator, but Petter suddenly realized the real danger wasn't Sylvian discovering their lie. It was the terrifying possibility that it might become the truth. The tension in the house following the cafe incident was thick and suffocating. Mila retreated into her graphic design work, hiding behind the glow of her monitors in the dining room, while Peter aggressively pruned his bonsai trees on the back deck until his fingers were stained with sap. They were circling each other, terrified to address the shift in their dynamic. Sunday morning brought a heavy, unrelenting Seattle downpour, trapping them indoors. Peter was in the kitchen attempting to make a peace offering of blueberry pancakes when the doorbell chimed. Assuming it was Yasmina coming to deliver more of Mila's mail, Petter wiped his hands on a towel and swung the front door open. The smile died on his face instantly. Standing on the porch holding a sleek black umbrella was a woman who looked like she belonged in a high-end fashion magazine rather than a suburban porch. Her dark auburn hair was flawlessly styled, her lips painted a severe, matte red. "Hello, Petter," Roxana Bartlett said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely unwelcome. Petter froze, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. Roxana was his ex-wife. They had divorced 6 years ago, a bitter, venomous split that had left Petter emotionally bankrupt and financially bruised. Roxana hadn't set foot in this neighborhood since the day the ink dried on the divorce papers. "Roxana," Petter managed to say, his voice tight, "what are you doing here?" She closed her umbrella with a sharp snap and stepped past him into the foyer without being invited. She shed her designer raincoat, her sharp eyes instantly scanning the house. She noticed the subtle changes immediately. The feminine throw pillows on the sofa, the colourful art prints Mila had hung, the distinct scent of a floral perfume in the air. "I heard the most fascinating rumour from a mutual acquaintance in the city," Roxana purred, turning to face him. "They said my notoriously hermit-like ex-husband had suddenly eloped with the little girl from next door. I had to come see this midlife crisis for myself. It's none of your business, Roxana. You need to leave." "Oh, don't be rude, Peter," she laughed, a brittle sound. "I'm just worried about you. You know how protective I am of my investments." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "Especially since I know for a fact you pay substantial alimony. I'd hate to think this new arrangement might affect my monthly deposits." Before Peter could formulate a scathing reply, footsteps padded down the hallway. Mila appeared, wearing one of Petra's oversized grey sweaters, her hair tied in a messy bun. She stopped dead when she saw Roxana. "Peter," Mila asked, her voice cautious, "who is this?" Roxana's gaze swept over Mila, taking in her youthful face and casual attire with blatant condescension. "Ah, you must be the child bride. Mila, isn't it? I'm Roxana, Peter's first, and let's be honest, actual wife." Mila stiffened, her spine snapping straight. Peter stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Mila held up a hand, stopping him. The vulnerability she had worn all week vanished, replaced by the steel she had shown when confronting her uncle. "Ex-wife," Mila corrected, her voice deceptively calm. She walked over to Peter, sliding her arm through his and intertwining their fingers. She leaned into him, a picture of domestic solidarity. "It's nice to meet you, Roxana, though I'm surprised you made the drive. Peter has mentioned you, of course, mostly in the context of how much happier he is now." Roxana's eyes flashed with anger. "Is that so? Well, honey, let me give you some advice. Peter is a creature of habit. He doesn't do spontaneity. This sudden marriage, it reeks of desperation. I give it 6 months before he retreats into his shell and leaves you wondering what you did wrong. I think we're going to be just fine." Mila smiled sweetly. "We're very committed to our future together. Now, unless you're here to drop off a belated wedding gift, I think it's time for you to go. We were just about to sit down for a family breakfast." Roxana stared at Mila, realizing she wasn't dealing with a naive pushover. She scoffed, grabbing her raincoat. "Fine. Play house while it lasts, Peter. But don't think I won't be having my lawyers look into this little farce. If your financial situation has changed, I want my cut." She slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Peter exhaled a shaky breath, turning to Mila. He was stunned by her ferocity. "Mila, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was coming. She just smelled blood in the water." Mila let go of his hand, wrapping her arms around her own waist. "It's fine, Peter. We're a team, right? We have to defend this against everyone." Before Peter could reply, a loud, aggressive knock hammered on the front door again. Peter cursed under his breath, assuming Roxana had returned for the last word. He yanked the door open angrily. It wasn't Roxana. It was a man in a cheap suit, holding a manila envelope. "Peter Papa Fava?" the man asked, his tone bored. "Yes." The man shoved the envelope into Peter's chest. "You've been served." He turned and walked away into the rain. Peter tore open the envelope, his heart sinking as he read the heavy legal jargon. Mila hovered over his shoulder, reading the bold print at the top of the page. It was a summons from Linda Krog, a high-powered corporate attorney working for Sylvie and Holland. They were demanding Peter and Mila appear for a formal sworn deposition on Wednesday to answer questions regarding the validity of their marriage under threat of perjury. The war wasn't just on their doorstep anymore, it was dragging them into the courtroom, and one wrong answer would strip Mila of everything. Wednesday morning arrived with a suffocating, overcast gloom that seemed perfectly tailored for a legal execution. The rain lashed against the windshield in angry driving sheets as Peter navigated the slick downtown Seattle streets. The deposition was held in the imposing offices of Linda Krog, a high-rise fortress of corporate law. The conference room itself was a marvel of psychological intimidation. Cold, polished mahogany that reflected the grey light, floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dizzying, vertigo-inducing view of the city below, and air conditioning so aggressively frigid it raised permanent goosebumps on Peter's arms. A condensation-beaded pitcher of ice water sat in the center of the table, untouched. Peter sat rigid next to Mila, feeling the nervous electric heat radiating from her shoulder. Across the expansive table sat Linda Krog, a woman with sharp, predatory features, framed by severe silver hair and wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Peter's car. Next to her, Sylvian Holland looked infuriatingly relaxed. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, steepling his fingers and wearing a faint, triumphant smirk, like a spider watching a fly exhaust itself in a web. Antotapia, Peter's pragmatic lawyer, sat on Peter's left, her demeanor calm but her eyes sharp and assessing behind her wire-rimmed glasses. A court reporter sat silently at the end of the table, fingers hovering over a stenotype machine, ready to capture every stammer and hesitation. "Let the record show," Linda Crow began, her voice crisp, clinical, and entirely devoid of warmth, "that we are here to ascertain the legal validity of the marriage between Peter Papafava and Mila Ribeiro in relation to the execution of the Rodney Pirano Trust." She adjusted her reading glasses and fixed her gaze on Petter with the intensity of a sniper. "Mr. Papafava, you are under oath. Perjury carries severe criminal penalties, including substantial fines and imprisonment. Do you fully understand the gravity of these proceedings?" "I do," Petter stated, his voice steady, though his pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against his collarbone. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries and the theatricals," Linda said, snapping open a thick, leather-bound folder. The sound echoed loudly in the sterile room. "You claim to be in a genuine, romantic marriage. Yet our investigators have noted a complete, glaring lack of courtship prior to Rodney Pirano's death. No dinner dates, no romantic vacations, no theatre tickets, no public displays of affection whatsoever. We have a 42-year-old divorced man and a 24-year-old woman, suddenly eloping at City Hall mere days before a multi-million-dollar inheritance deadline. It insults the intelligence of everyone in this room." "Objection!" Antotapia interjected smoothly, not even looking up from her legal pad. "Counsel is testifying and offering personal, inflammatory opinions, rather than asking a direct question of the deponent." "Fine," Linda snapped, her jaw tightening. "Mr. Papafava, when exactly did you first realize you were romantically in love with your neighbor's daughter? Pinpoint the day." Petter glanced at Mila. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were entirely white, the gold band on her ring finger catching the muted light. He needed to weave the emotional truth into the logistical lie. "It wasn't a sudden lightning bolt realization," Petter answered, his voice softening naturally as he looked back at the opposing lawyer. "It was a slow, quiet accumulation. I spent years watching Mila grow into an incredibly strong, brilliant, and resilient woman. When her father passed so suddenly, my instinct to protect her from scavengers overwhelmed everything else. The crisis stripped away our hesitations and the artificial boundaries of being neighbors. We realized we didn't want to waste another second pretending we didn't care for each other." Sylvian let out a loud, derisive scoff, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Touching. Truly worthy of a daytime soap opera. Tell me, Romeo, since you are so deeply intertwined, what side of the bed does she sleep on?" "The right," Petter answered instantly, the memory of her small frame curled against the edge of his mattress flashing in his mind. "What is her morning routine?" Linda pressed, leaning forward like a hound catching a scent. "Detail it for the record." "She hits snooze twice, never once, never 3 times, Petter said, the domestic minutiae flowing easily because they were no longer a script, they were his newly lived reality. "She drinks her coffee black, which I make for her while she's in the shower. She spends exactly 12 minutes doing her makeup, mostly eyeliner, and she always leaves her graphic design sketches and charcoal pencils scattered across the dining room table, despite my habit of keeping surfaces clear." Linda's eyes narrowed infinitesimally. She hadn't expected him to have the domestic choreography down so flawlessly. "My client's former sister-in-law, Roxana Bartlett, submitted a sworn affidavit this morning. She stated under oath that you are a creature of extreme habit who actively avoids emotional commitment and resents shared spaces. She characterized this sudden marriage as a desperate financial arrangement to save your supposedly struggling architectural firm. My ex-wife," Petter said, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth ached at the mention of Roxana's betrayal, "is bitter, deeply financially motivated, and hasn't been a part of my daily life for 6 years. Her assessment of my emotional capacity or my firm's ledgers is entirely irrelevant and woefully outdated. Lenient absorbed the blow and smoothly pivoted, turning her predatory gaze to Miller. Mrs. Papafava, let's talk about the physical nature of your marriage. A true marriage is, of course, consummated. Can you describe for the record any specific identifying marks on your husband's body? A birthmark? A scar? The room went dead, suffocatingly silent. It was an aggressive, incredibly invasive question deliberately designed to break a fake couple who had never shared genuine intimacy. Mila's cheeks flushed a deep, embarrassed crimson, but to Petta's amazement, she didn't look down or falter. She looked directly at Linda, lifting her chin in an act of pure defiance. He has a small, faded burn scar on his left forearm just below the elbow, Mila said, her voice ringing clear in the quiet room. Petta's breath hitched in his throat. She had noticed it on Sunday morning while he was flipping pancakes, though she hadn't said a word. It's shaped almost like a crescent moon, and he has a cluster of 3 distinct freckles just below his right collarbone. Furthermore, he carries deep tension in his left shoulder when he works too long on his drafting board, and he runs extremely hot at night to the point where he always kicks the duvet off his side of the bed. Sylvian's arrogant smirk finally faltered, melting into a scowl of genuine concern. Linda Krog flipped a page in her folder with a sharp, angry rustle of paper, her lips pursed in visible frustration. For the next 2 grueling hours, they hammered Peter and Mila without mercy, demanding joint bank records, questioning their grocery shopping habits, cross-referencing credit card receipts, and trying desperately to trip them up on timelines. But because they had actually merged their lives under intense pressure over the agonizing weekend, their answers aligned flawlessly. They had built an impenetrable fortress out of their shared survival. When Anto finally called a hard end to the deposition, citing borderline harassment and badgering, Petta felt like he had just run a marathon with sandbags strapped to his chest. As they stood up, limbs stiff and trembling, to leave the glass room, Sylvian stepped sideways, deliberately blocking the doorway. His bodyguard Ronald loomed ominously just behind him. "You're very good liars," Sylvian hissed, the mask of civility completely gone, his eyes dark with unadulterated malice. "You've rehearsed well, but a superior court judge is going to review this transcript on Friday. When he looks at the glaring age gap, the impossibly convenient timing, and Roxana's sworn testimony regarding your character, he will freeze the trust. You can't keep this performance up forever, Mila. You'll slip, you'll make a mistake, and when you do, I will take everything Rodney left behind right down to the floorboards." The drive back to the quiet suburbs was consumed by heavy, suffocating rain and a silence so thick and oppressive it felt tangible in the car. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers was the only sound. The deposition had been a brutal psychological violation of their privacy, dragging their forced intimacy and their fragile dynamic into the unforgiving, sterile light of a legal battlefield. When they finally walked through the heavy oak front door of Petta's house, the adrenaline that had been keeping them violently afloat for hours suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a raw, devastating exhaustion that settled deep into their bones. Peter sluggishly shrugged off his wet wool coat, hanging it up before heading for the kitchen. He desperately needed to pour a strong drink when he noticed the blinking, accusatory red light on his landline answering machine. Without thinking, moving on pure autopilot, he hit play. Roxana's cultured, venomous voice filled the quiet living room, dripping with an entitlement that made Peter's skin crawl. "Peter, darling, Sylvian Holland just called. He offered me a very, very generous consulting fee to testify in person at Friday's injunction hearing. I told him I'd have to think about it. But if you want me to suddenly lose my memory regarding your little fake marriage and my knowledge of your financial habits, you're going to have to match his price. I want $50,000 wired to my account by tomorrow noon, or I will stand up in open court and tell the judge exactly why my emotionally stunted, commitment-phobic ex-husband is suddenly playing house with a 20-something. Tick-tock, Peter, don't make me ruin you." The recording clicked off with a harsh final beep. Petter closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the kitchen island until his knuckles ached, as a massive, pulsing headache bloomed violently behind his eyes. Roxana wasn't just testifying, she was actively extorting him, and she had the power to make the judge doubt everything they had just bled to prove. A floorboard creaked loudly in the hallway. Peter snapped his head up to see Miller standing near the archway. Her face was paper white, her eyes wide with horror. She had heard every single poisonous word. "Mila," Petter started, taking a slow, placating step toward her. "Don't listen to her. I'll handle Roxana. I can pull some equity from the firm. I can get the money." "No," Mila interrupted, her voice shaking violently, her chest heaving. She backed away from him as if he were radioactive. "No, Petter. This has gone way too far. She's going to ruin your architectural firm. She's going to bankrupt you. Sylvian is going to drag you down into the mud right alongside me." "We knew it would be difficult," Petter argued, his own panic rising as he closed the distance between them. "We just have to hold the line for 2 more days until Friday's hearing. We beat them in the deposition. We can beat them in court." "It's not just a line anymore, Peter. It's your actual life," Mila shouted, hot tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, tracing tracks down her pale cheeks. She turned on her heel and practically ran down the hall toward the master bedroom. Peter followed her, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm in his chest. He stood frozen in the doorway and watched in absolute horror as Mila dragged her canvas duffel bag from the closet shelf and began wildly, indiscriminately throwing her clothes into it. She grabbed handfuls of sweaters and jeans, her breath coming in jagged, desperate gasps. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising in volume and terror. "I'm leaving," she choked out, viciously yanking the zipper of her makeup bag with trembling hands. "I'm going to call Anto right now. I'll tell the judge the absolute truth. I'll tell him it was a sham, a desperate fraud. I forfeit the estate to Sylvian." "Mela, stop it!" Peter crossed the room in 3 long, desperate strides. He reached out and grabbed her wrists, gently but firmly, stopping her frantic, destructive packing. "You are not giving up Rodney's house to that monster. Your father wanted you to have it. I won't let you throw it away." "You don't have a choice!" Mila cried, struggling against his grip, though she lacked the strength or the true desire to pull away. "I asked you to sign a piece of paper, Peter. I didn't ask you to be relentlessly interrogated by corporate lawyers, or blackmailed by your vicious ex-wife, or forced to share a bed with a terrified girl. I'm ruining your life. You spent 6 years building this peaceful, quiet sanctuary after she broke you, and I've completely destroyed it in less than a week." "You didn't destroy it," Peter said, his voice suddenly dropping from a shout to a fierce, desperate whisper. He let go of her wrists, sliding his warm hands up her trembling arms to gently cup her tear-stained face. His thumbs carefully wiped away the moisture on her cheeks. "I spent 6 years hiding in this pristine glass box, Mila. I thought I was at peace, but I was just numb. I was half dead, going through the motions. You broke the glass. You let the air and the colour back in." Mila froze, her breath hitching in her throat, her dark, incredibly vulnerable eyes wide and searching his face for any sign of a lie. "Peter, I'm not doing this out of loyalty to Rodney anymore," Petter confessed, the absolute terrifying truth tearing itself from his chest. "I'm doing it for me. I can't imagine this house without your charcoal sketches cluttering the table. I can't imagine making coffee for one, or waking up without you curled up on the right side of the bed. It stopped being a fake arrangement for me the exact second I kissed you in that cafe to shut up that investigator." A broken, wet sob escaped Mila's lips. She sagged against his palms. "I was so terrified you were just putting up with me out of pity," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been in love with you for years, Petter. I just never thought you'd ever see me as anything but the clumsy girl next door." Petter didn't waste another second on words. They were entirely insufficient. He leaned down and captured her lips with his. There was no audience this time, no private investigators or predatory lawyers to perform for. The kiss wasn't a calculated defense mechanism. It was fueled by a week of agonizing, white-hot tension, desperate fear, and a profound, overwhelming love that had finally broken free. Mila's hands tangled desperately in his hair as he pulled her flush against his solid chest, anchoring her to him. The half-packed duffel bag fell from the bed to the hardwood floor with a heavy thud, instantly forgotten. As they stumbled backward together, falling onto the king-size bed that had been their awkward, terrifying battlefield all week, the rigid lines of their fake contractual arrangement completely disintegrated. In its place, a passionate, unbreakable, and beautifully real marriage began. Friday morning, the day of the dreaded injunction hearing, felt entirely different from the rest of the week. The heavy Seattle clouds had finally broken, letting streams of pale sunlight wash over the city. As they walked up the imposing, wide marble steps of the King County Courthouse, Peter held Mila's hand tightly. Her grip wasn't nervous and icy like it had been outside the bank. It was warm, steadfast, and deeply reassuring. They had spent the last 2 days locked securely in the house, shedding the crushing weight of their fears and fully embracing the truth of their new relationship. Inside the judge's private chambers, the air was crackling with tension. Judge Harrison, an older, stern-looking man with a no-nonsense reputation, sat behind his massive, cluttered oak desk, meticulously reviewing the thick file of the deposition transcript. Sylvian Holland stood stiffly to the side, flanked by a highly confident Linda Krog. To Petter's mild surprise and immense relief, Roxana wasn't in the room. He had entirely ignored her extortionate voicemail, refusing to return her calls and calling her bluff. "Your Honor," Linda Crow began, stepping forward with her usual aggressive swagger. "My client firmly asserts that this marriage is a blatant, fraudulent circumvention of the specific terms outlined in the Rodney Pirano Trust. We ask that the estate be immediately frozen and reverted to Mr. Holland as per the default clause. The extreme age difference, the highly suspicious timing, the suddenness of the ceremony, it all points unequivocally to fraud." Judge Harrison looked up slowly over the rim of his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. "I've read the entire deposition, Ms. Krug. Mr. Papafava and Ms. Ribeiro answered every single invasive question regarding their cohabitation, their shared finances, and their personal habits flawlessly. Mere suspicion of the timing is not, and never will be, legal proof of fraud in my courtroom." Sylvian stepped forward, entirely unable to contain his boiling rage. "Judge, look at them! The man is almost twice her age. He's a bankrupt, washed-up architect who desperately needed a payday, and she's a panicked child trying to hold onto a house. It's a transparent sham." "Your Honor," Antotapia spoke up, her voice slicing through the heavy room like a cold, exceptionally sharp blade. She unclasped her briefcase and pulled out a thick, bright manila folder. "We not only maintain the absolute legal and emotional validity of this marriage, but we are also formally filing a complaint for egregious harassment, illegal surveillance, and intimidation against Mr. Holland and his legal team." Anto stepped forward, handing the thick folder directly to the judge and sliding a duplicate copy across the desk to Linda Krug. Linda opened it, and Petter watched with deep satisfaction as the colour completely drained from the high-powered lawyer's face. "In that file, Your Honor," Anto continued, pacing slightly, "are time-stamped photographs of an unlicensed private investigator, Yuli Halverson, aggressively accosting my clients in public to extract information. We also have detailed license plate records linking the heavily tinted grey sedan parked illegally outside my client's home, directly to a private security firm owned in full by Mr. Holland. Furthermore, if you turn to page 4, we have a transcribed recorded voicemail from Mr. Papafava's ex-wife explicitly detailing how Mr. Holland offered her a $50,000 bribe to perjure herself in this very room today." Sylvian turned the colour of ash, whirling on his lawyer with wide, panicked eyes. "They're lying! This is fabricated nonsense!" Judge Harrison slammed his hand flat on his desk, the sound echoing through the small chamber like a gunshot. "Silence, Mr. Holland! Bribery, unlicensed surveillance, extortion!" The judge glared at Sylvian with absolute, unmasked disgust. "This court looks very, very poorly upon wealthy individuals who utilize criminal intimidation tactics to rob a grieving daughter of her rightful, legal inheritance." The judge picked up his heavy fountain pen and signed the final document with sharp, angry, decisive strokes. "The injunction is categorically denied. The marriage is recognized by the state as legally binding and valid. The assets of the Rodney Pirano Trust, including the property and business, are to be released immediately and unconditionally to Mila Papafava." He looked up, pointing the gold tip of his pen directly at Sylvian. "And Mr. Holland, if I ever see your name on my docket regarding this young woman or her husband again, I will personally see to it that the district attorney investigates you for extortion and witness tampering. Get out of my chambers before I hold you in contempt." Sylvian looked like a man who had just swallowed glass. He glared at Peter and Mila with pure, unadulterated hatred, but with a sharp, desperate tug from Linda Krog, he turned and stormed out of the room, his bodyguard trailing uselessly behind him. It was over. The siege was broken. Mila let out a long, shuddering breath she felt like she had been holding for a solid week. She turned to Peter, hot tears of pure, unadulterated joy pooling in her dark eyes. Right there, in the middle of the judge's chambers and in front of a beaming Anto, Peter wrapped his strong arms around his wife. He lifted her slightly off the ground, burying his face in her hair as he kissed her deeply. They had fought the war, outsmarted the monster, saved the beloved house, and in the terrifying ashes of their chaotic week, they had found exactly what they had both been missing. The aggressive for sale sign was a distant memory. Peter had actually chopped it up for kindling in the fire pit, and Rodney's home remained a beacon of warmth on the street. Sitting on their shared, expansive back deck, Peter carefully pruned a delicate juniper bonsai. He paused, watching Mila at the patio table. She was deeply engrossed in a new graphic design sketch, the simple gold band on her left finger catching the weak afternoon light as her hand moved across the paper. There were no more shadowy private investigators lurking in sedans, no more vicious, greedy uncles threatening their peace, and absolutely no more pretending. The desperate marriage of convenience had successfully saved her inheritance, but infinitely more importantly, it had saved them both from a lifetime of solitary shadows and quiet regrets. They had frantically built a fortress out of a necessary lie, only to discover that the truest, deepest love had been hiding inside its walls all along. If Peter and Mila's intense journey from a desperate Friday deadline to a lifetime of genuine, passionate love captured your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with your fellow romance lovers who enjoy a good fake dating trope, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping emotional stories just like this one.